As things currently stand in the West, men are increasingly opting out of our society. There are many reasons why this is happening right now, at the worst possible time in Europe, where we have a declining population. This Reddit post, which I'm showing on screen, enumerates some of the reasons why. The article talks about a veritable death of marriage, and addictions to video games and other things. The person agrees that this is reasonable for men to do. The author of the post bemoans that men are dodging some sort of socially imposed responsibility, and says that the reality is that things are too risky for men to actually carry out that script. As somebody who's probably watched my channel a bunch, you know that I'm probably going to disagree with this. This not insofar as saying that it isn't risky, but in that I'm going to say that there's more than just a social role to be played here by men. This is because man's will is best invested in something that's going to make him better. As I'm sure many of you can attest who are watching, your lives are miserable when you're addicted to video games and you're living off of dole. I'm sure that those who aren't have met people like this, and if you're somebody who is interested in social science studies, I personally don't trust them, then there are plenty that you can find on things like their anxiety levels. Although we consider this sometimes from a very flawed scientific perspective, sometimes we know this from personal experience, I think that a very important place to start looking is in the old thinkers who came before this scientific bureaucracy which we now live under. For example, let's take the words of advice of a 5th century monk called St. John Cassian. He describes the sort of dejection which this lifestyle entrusts on people as follows. Just as a moth devours clothing and a worm devours wood, so dejection devours a man's soul. It persuades him to shun every helpful encounter and stops him accepting advice from his true friends or giving them a courteous and peaceful reply. How many of you here watching are aware of that kind of feeling of intense anger when it comes to good works or interacting with another person? How many of you who've known NEETs yourselves know how these people feel because they've said that to you? Does it sound familiar, perhaps? This embitterment of society is one of those reasons why you should just not drop out of society. But you might respond that you don't want anything to do with the society because you can't get anything out of it. Women hate me. They're only interested in Chad. Why should I participate in a society that hates my race? The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and I'll never live a proper life because of this oppression. And so when you're listening to these thoughts, you're probably thinking, I'm going to opt out. There's nothing for me to get. If they're not going to do anything for me, then I'm not going to give anything to them. This transactionalization of our society in every aspect is a sign of its current decay and potential destruction. Let's look at another example. Marriages. As many of you probably know, there was a massive spike in the 1970s in divorces, but this eventually flattened out after some time. The problem is that the marriage rates never recovered, and what replaced it was a culture of prenups and of 7-year marriages. The relationships that our grandparents once had for their entire lives have now been replaced by temporary, very fleeting relationships. This is because the culture has fundamentally forgotten what love actually is. Fundamentally, for a marriage to be successful, there must be self-giving love. The absence of this will lead to selfishness, which will divide the two people involved. If a single partner holds back in the relationship, holding back some part of themselves, it sours it. And if this goes too far, it can sour both partners and lead to some sort of divorce. Marriage is fundamentally a self-giving enterprise, and as this forms the family, which is the basis of the society itself requires people to be self-sacrificing for it to work. If men do not self-sacrifice, then there is no society. And all of those things that are hidden away in, those things that are supposedly reasonable to partake in to that extent, those things will disappear. And so if there's not a setting aside of self, then there's nothing but destruction. Many of these same men may think, why have I been born? I never chose to be born. And in that actually lies the answer to the particular problem we're dealing with. You did not create yourself, so you don't belong to yourself, and so you must, by virtue of justice, surrender yourself to something greater than yourself. And who determines that? Well, the person that many people here have been running from, and that is God. Your mum and dad may have given you life, but you're not dependent on them now. But what you are dependent on is existence, and since you can die, you are not existence. So you must serve existence. This pure existence is God. The fact that we have millions of cells in our brain, and yet we have a single undivided intelligence, should strike us as very interesting and should suggest to us that our brain is in fact not the locus of our intelligence, but is in fact non-physical. Likewise, the fact that we can know our minds, but we can't know what's written on a piece of paper necessarily, but especially if it's not written in our language, tells us that also the structure of our thinking is completely different from the physical world. Therefore, as something that's indivisible, and yet it is instantiated, it must belong to existence, in a sense. Because existence isn't divisible, and therefore we can say existence is personal, and so we have God. And so from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend you some real self-improvement books. Some real books that will motivate you to get back out into the society and do yourself some good, in line with this God. First of all of the empty your mind nonsense meditation that you constantly get recommended is not going to help you. All it's going to do is fill you with evil thoughts and things that are worse. And so I'd recommend The Ways of Mental Prayer. This is a book that will show you how to properly meditate by filling your mind with good things. The second book I'm going to recommend you, which I don't have a physical copy of, is Dr. Edward Fazer's The Last Superstition, which is going to deal with a lot of the scientific copes that many scientists and philosophers try to throw at the concept of God. The final book I'm going to recommend is going to be a very large academic volume on a book that many of you probably think is just for unwashed, country folk who don't know the modern advances of science. And that is A Catholic Introduction to the Old Testament by Dr. John Bergsma and Dr. Brant Petrie. This goes through the 2,000-year Christian tradition and actually shows that Christianity is an extremely sophisticated philosophical system, but also extremely important for your own personal development. In conclusion, I'd like to thank everyone for watching, and I'd like to request that you watch the video that is going to be recommended to you on the end screen, because the longer that you can currently watch my channel, the more views that's going to drive to the channel, and therefore it's going to grow it. And of course, as always, please like and subscribe, and if you'd like to see more content like this, there's a Patreon in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.